I didn't say a word when Karen McPherson planted her precious rose garden right across my century-old ranch road. I just smiled and watched her install that fancy wrought iron fence, complete with electronic gates and security cameras. What she didn't know is that blocking a legal easement in Texas is like poking a sleeping rattlesnake. With a short stick, these suburban trophy wives thought they could fence off my family's cattle route while I was deployed in Iraq. These manicured tyrants built their perfect gated paradise on my great-grandfather's deeded right-of-way, complete with speed bumps and HOA patrol golf carts. But here's what they didn't count on. I'm a surveyor with the Army Corps of Engineers, and that little piece of paper in my grandfather's filing cabinet had been waiting 87 years for someone stupid enough to block a legal easement. The audacity was truly breathtaking, until I started charging them $50 every time their garbage truck needed access and their luxury subdivision discovered what eminent domain really means. Drop a comment below because you're about to witness the most satisfying HOA takedown involving property law, surveying equipment, and the beautiful sound of money flowing in the right direction. Let me introduce you to Marcus Rodriguez. That's me, 36 years old, Army surveyor and fourth-generation owner of the Double R Ranch, 180 acres of prime Texas hill country just north of San Antonio. My great-grandfather Rodrigo bought this land back in 1936 when the whole area was nothing but cedar brush cattle and the occasional oil. Derek Rodrigo was the kind of man who believed in handshake deals and treating the land with respect, but he was also smart enough to get everything in writing in 1937. He granted himself a permanent easement across what's now the fancy Willow Ridge Estates development, 20 feet wide, running straight through the middle of what would someday become suburban paradise. Rodrigo always said someday that back road would be worth more than the cattle that used it for now. It was just a dusty path where we moved livestock between pastures and hauled feed during drought seasons. The county surveyor even helped him file the easement deed. Rodrigo believed in planning ahead, but he never imagined subdivision Karens with too much time and not enough sense. Then came my deployment to Iraq, where I specialized in infrastructure surveying and land management. Turns out mapping water wells and establishing base perimeters in a combat zone teaches you everything you need to know about the sacred nature of property rights and how quickly people will fight when those rights get violated. While I was dodging IEDs and mapping Fallujah, my grandmother Elena passed away. The ranch went into a family trust managed by my well-meaning but overwhelmed cousin Maria, who lives in Houston and knows about as much about easement law as I know about underwater basket weaving. She hired Crosswind Property Management to handle the ranch operations. The grazing leases got renewed automatically. But here's the critical detail. Maria never actually read the subdivision plans when Willow Ridge Estates filed for development approval. Big mistake. Enter our main villain, Karen McPherson, 48 years old, HOA president of Willow Ridge Estates, and the kind of woman who treats a Mercedes G-Wagon like a military vehicle and considers tennis lessons a form of community service. Karen's got that particular brand of suburban entitlement that develops around age 40 when women realize their marketing degree isn't as fulfilling as they'd hoped. You know the type: perfectly blown-out hair, aggressive politeness, and an unshakable belief that property values justify any behavior. Karen's married to City Planning Commissioner Dale McPherson, which should tell you everything about how she gets permits approved so quickly. She's built a reputation for neighborhood beautification initiatives, which is code for systematically removing anything that doesn't match her vision of suburban perfection. The scent of her expensive perfume can't mask the underlying aroma of privilege and passive aggression that follows her around like a cloud. I came home from deployment in March 2024, ready to finally modernize the ranch operations. Drove down Farm Road 1823 past the old windmill, expecting to turn onto our traditional back road access. Instead, I found ornate iron fencing, decorative stone pillars, and a sign reading Willow Ridge Estates. Private community authorized personnel. Only the crunch of fresh asphalt under my boots felt wrong. Somehow, too perfect for a road that had been caliche and gravel for 87 years. I could taste the dust from construction and my own rising confusion as I walked up to the fancy electronic gate. "Sorry, sir," said the security guard, not looking sorry at all. "This is private property, now residents and guests only." I called the sheriff's department. Deputy Santos arrived and explained with obvious embarrassment that the HOA had installed gates across what they claimed was their internal road system. Apparently, when you build a subdivision around an existing easement and nobody challenges it, for long enough, some people start believing they own everything inside their fence line. That's when Karen appeared, emerging from her G-Wagon like some kind of suburban general. Her voice had that artificially sweet tone that immediately made me want to check my property boundaries. "I'm sorry, honey," she said, smiling like she was doing me a favor. "But this road serves our community now. If you need ranch access, you can go around through the county road like everyone else." Here's what really made my surveyor blood boil. They hadn't just blocked the road, they'd built 12 houses with driveways that crossed directly over my legal easement. Every morning, Karen's neighbors backed their Escalades and Teslas across property that had belonged to my family since before their great-grandparents were born, as I stood there watching a garbage truck rumble across my easement. Karen's parting words echoed in my ears. "Maybe you should have stayed in Texas instead of playing soldier." That's when I knew this wasn't about road access anymore. It was war. I hired the first attorney I could find. Another big mistake. This guy wanted $15,000 just to file an easement enforcement action and warned me that fighting an established HOA could take years. Turns out, while I was mapping Iraqi infrastructure, Karen's husband, Dale, had fast-tracked subdivision approval with minimal environmental review, but here's where my Army surveying experience became invaluable. While that overpriced lawyer was talking billable hours, I was digging through the county deed records like I was hunting for buried IEDs. And just like in Iraq, the truth was in the original surveys. I found Rodrigo's 1937 easement deed, and it was absolutely beautiful. Recorded in Book 47, page 238 of the Guadalupe County Deed Records, permanent access easement, 20 feet in width, running east to west across the northern portion of what is now lots 15 through 27 of Willow Ridge Estates. The legal description was perfect, matching the original government survey down to the exact metes and bounds. Here's your first knowledge nugget. Any easement recorded before subdivision development automatically supersedes HOA restrictions, period. The metallic taste of adrenaline hit my tongue as I realized what I'd found. This wasn't just a property dispute, it was a federal survey violation. But the real gold mine was Rodrigo's correspondence file. Tucked behind the deed was a 1973 letter from the county engineer confirming that the easement provided legal access for agricultural operations, including commercial cattle transport. That meant 18-wheelers, feed trucks, and anything else related to ranch operations had legal right-of-way. While I was photocopying documents at the courthouse, I discovered something even better. The subdivision developer had been required to acknowledge all existing easements in their final plat. But somehow Rodrigo's easement got mysteriously omitted from the official filing. Meanwhile, Karen was busy playing the victim. She organized an emergency HOA meeting about dangerous ranch traffic threatening children's safety, complete with a presentation about liability insurance and property values. I watched her on the community Facebook page talking about rural traffic disrupting their peaceful suburban lifestyle. "We moved here for the quiet, safe environment," she posted with photos of cattle trucks that hadn't used the road in 6 months. "Now we're supposed to tolerate dangerous farm equipment racing through our neighborhood." The beautiful thing about social media is that people love to document their own crimes. If Karen had done any research, she would have discovered that blocking a legal easement carries automatic damages plus attorney fees, but suburban Karens don't research, they just react. Karen wasn't finished. She filed complaints with the county about unsightly agricultural operations. Claiming my ranch was an environmental hazard, she submitted photographs of perfectly normal cattle operations to the health department and demanded inspections for everything from septic systems to hay storage. The harassment campaign was textbook HOA, intimidation noise complaints. When I started my tractor at 7 a.m., which is legal agricultural hours, unsightly property citations for ranch equipment that had been in the same spot for 20 years. Nuisance animal reports about cattle that were legally grazing on my own property. But Karen's masterstroke was involving city planning. Her husband Dale used his position to initiate a comprehensive land use review of my ranch. Suddenly, I had building inspectors, fire marshals, and environmental compliance officers showing up like a bureaucratic SWAT team. Each inspector found minor violations requiring expensive corrections. The building inspector declared that my equipment barn needed $8,000 in upgrades. The fire marshal decided my brush pile was a wildfire hazard, requiring professional removal. The environmental officer wanted soil samples from every pasture. I recognized the coordinated attack immediately. It's the same pressure tactic they use against insurgents in urban warfare. Overwhelm the target with bureaucracy until they surrender. But here's the thing about Army surveyors. We don't surrender. We measure while Karen was drowning me in paperwork. I was conducting my own survey operation using military-grade GPS equipment. I mapped every inch of that easement and documented how 12 houses had driveways crossing my legal right-of-way. Turns out, when you build on someone else's property, that's called trespassing. My survey revealed something beautiful. Karen's prize rose garden. The one featured in the HOA newsletter was planted directly in the center of my easement. Those award-winning flowers she was so proud of were literally growing on my property. Here's your second knowledge. Nugget easement violations often carry damages equal to fair market rental value for the entire period of unauthorized use. When someone builds on your easement, you can charge rent retroactively. The deeper I surveyed, the more violations I found. The decorative entrance pillars were built on my easement. The electronic gate system crossed my property. The speed bumps were installed on my right-of-way. Even the fancy landscaping with native Texas plants was trespassing on Rodriguez family property. Meanwhile, Karen hired a private investigator to research my military service and financial situation. She was spreading rumors about PTSD and violent tendencies, organizing petition drives to have the county revoke my agricultural exemptions. "We have children playing in this neighborhood," she told the local paper. "We can't have unstable veterans driving dangerous equipment through our community." But while Karen was playing character assassination, I was building legal alliances. I connected with the Texas Farm Bureau, who provided an attorney specializing in agricultural easement law. I partnered with the Property Rights Foundation, who had experience fighting HOA overreach. My new attorney, Sarah Chen, was a different breed entirely. She specialized in what she called easement monetization, helping property owners convert trespassing violations into revenue streams. Sarah's strategy was elegant. Instead of just demanding they remove their improvements, we'd charge them fair market rent for using my property. The economics were stunning. 12 driveways crossing my 20-foot easement at current commercial rates meant $600 per month per household in rental income. The decorative landscaping was worth another $200 monthly. The electronic gate system added $300 more. Karen's precious rose garden was using premium real estate worth $500 per month total monthly rental value, $4,800. Karen's HOA had been trespassing on my property for 18 months. That was $86,000 in back rent plus penalties. But Sarah's master strategy went deeper. We'd offer them a choice: pay fair market rent monthly or purchase the easement at appraised value, which would be approximately $240,000. Either way, the Rodriguez family was about to start profiting from Karen's stupidity. Karen's reaction to our demand letter was immediate and predictable. She filed for an emergency restraining order claiming I was threatening violence and property destruction. She organized a media campaign portraying me as a dangerous veteran, terrorizing innocent families. The local news story made me sound like some kind of domestic terrorist. "Troubled veteran blocks suburban families" was the headline, complete with footage that somehow made my perfectly maintained ranch equipment look menacing. Karen appeared on camera wearing her Sunday best and speaking in that trembling voice politicians use when they want sympathy. "Our children walk to school past this man's property," she said, dabbing at her eyes. "Now he's threatening to drive cattle trucks through our neighborhood at all hours. We are just trying to protect our families." But while Karen was performing for cameras, Sarah was filing federal complaints. Turns out blocking an easement that provides agricultural access violates several federal rural development programs. The USDA was very interested to learn that a suburban HOA was interfering with commercial cattle operations. The pressure campaign escalated when Karen discovered the rental demand. She organized what she called a legal defense fund, asking each homeowner to contribute $2,000 for attorney fees to fight the dangerous veteran extortionist. But here's where Karen's psychology worked against her. She couldn't resist escalating. When pressured instead of negotiating, she doubled down, ordering the HOA's attorney to file criminal charges against me for extortion and terrorism. Sarah had been waiting for exactly this response. She immediately filed federal civil rights violations under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. Turns out when you specifically target veterans with harassment campaigns, that violates federal law, not just state property rights. The investigation revealed Karen's pattern of targeting military families the previous year. She'd forced out a Navy family whose husband deployed by filing constant noise violations about their children playing outside an Air Force widow. Had been driven to sell her home after continuous citations for Memorial Garden violations. This wasn't about property rights. It was systematic discrimination against military families. And now Karen had federal investigators asking uncomfortable questions. Meanwhile, my survey work was revealing the full scope of their trespassing. The entire Willow Ridge Estates subdivision had been built, assuming they owned my easement. The homeowner association's insurance was based on fraudulent property descriptions. The city had approved building permits that violated existing easements. Sarah filed additional complaints with the State Insurance Commission. Turns out when you lie on insurance applications about property boundaries, that's fraud. The Texas Department of Insurance was very interested in HOA policies that didn't acknowledge easement holders. The technical evidence was overwhelming. I documented every violation with military precision. GPS coordinates showing exact encroachment areas, photographs proving continuous trespassing, survey markers demonstrating original easement boundaries. Historical records establishing 87 years of legal use. Karen tried one final gambit. She offered to purchase a different access route for my ranch for $50,000 when I refused. She had Dale use his city planning position to threaten eminent domain proceedings against my entire ranch. That was her biggest mistake. Sarah immediately reported the corruption to the FBI. Turns out, when city officials use government power to benefit their spouse's private interests, that's federal corruption, and the penalty is prison time, not just civil fines. The FBI investigation expanded quickly. They discovered Dale had fast-tracked Karen's subdivision approval while receiving financial benefits from the development company. Bank records showed suspicious payments disguised as consulting fees. Cell phone records revealed coordination between Dale's office and the HOA during the harassment campaign. But the smoking gun was Karen's own Facebook messages. She'd been bragging to friends about how her husband could fix any property problem through his government connections. Federal prosecutors call that evidence of quid pro quo corruption. The breakthrough came when Sarah discovered the subdivision's original environmental impact assessment. The developer had been required to maintain all existing agricultural access routes as a condition of approval. By building across my easement, they'd violated federal environmental law, not just county property rights. The Environmental Protection Agency opened their own investigation, led by Compliance Officer Jennifer Wong, who specialized in suburban development violations. Turns out when subdivisions block agricultural operations, that affects federal farming programs and triggers additional penalties. Karen's desperation reached new levels when she realized federal agencies were involved. She hired Houston attorneys who specialized in federal defense work and tried to claim I was using my military connections to harass innocent civilians. The optics were terrible for Karen's suburban trophy wife, with corrupt husband versus veteran fighting for family property. The media narrative shifted completely when local farmers began supporting my fight. Every rancher in Guadalupe County had similar easement stories, and Karen had made an enemy of the entire agricultural community. Sarah's legal strategy was brilliant. Instead of fighting for just my easement rights, We'd expose the entire system of suburban colonization that was destroying rural Texas. We filed a federal class action on behalf of all agricultural operators affected by Willow Ridge Estates development. The discovery process revealed Karen's HOA had blocked 6 different ranch access routes, systematically forcing agricultural families to sell generational property to suburban developers. This wasn't isolated harassment. It was coordinated economic warfare designed to eliminate farming operations and maximize suburban property values. Meanwhile, Karen's financial house of cards was collapsing. Federal investigations had frozen her husband's assets pending corruption charges. The HOA's insurance was canceled when fraudulent property descriptions were discovered. Homeowner association fees increased dramatically when they lost their bulk discount rates. The technical preparation for trial was pure military precision. Sarah and I spent weeks mapping every violation, measuring every encroachment, and calculating exact damages. My survey equipment documented violations down to the inch, while legal research revealed precedents for punitive damages. Karen tried to negotiate, offering $100,000 to settle all claims. When that failed, she offered to pay monthly rental fees with a 5-year cap. Sarah's response was elegant. We'd accept the full appraised value of $240,000 plus back rent, plus penalties, plus attorney fees. No negotiations. The trial lasted 3 days in federal court. Judge Patricia Ramsey presiding. Karen's attorneys argued that blocking the easement was unintentional and that my demands were excessive revenge for personal grievances. But the evidence was overwhelming. Sarah presented Rodrigo's original 1937 deed recorded before any subdivision development, my military survey documentation proving continuous violation, federal environmental assessments showing agricultural damage, financial records calculating exact rental values, historical correspondence establishing 87 years of family use. The emotional impact came from community testimony. Miguel Santos, whose family had been forced out by similar HOA tactics, Elena Rodriguez. My cousin, whose ranch access had been blocked by the same developer, 3 other farming families who'd lost generational property to suburban encroachment. Karen took the stand wearing conservative navy blue and speaking in carefully practiced sentences, but her Facebook messages were devastating evidence. She'd documented her own discrimination against military families, bragged about using government connections to harass veterans, and celebrated forcing agricultural families to sell their property. Judge Ramsey's verdict was swift and comprehensive. The easement violation was willful and systematic, requiring immediate restoration of access, plus full damages. Karen's HOA owed $240,000 for easement purchase, plus $86,000 in back rent, plus $50,000 in penalties, plus all attorney fees, total judgment, $412,000. But the real victory was the federal injunction requiring removal of all improvements from the easement within 90 days. Karen's prize rose garden had to go. The decorative stone pillars were demolished. The electronic gates were relocated outside my property boundaries. Karen's reaction was predictable. She immediately filed appeals claiming the judgment would destroy property values and force innocent families into bankruptcy. Her attorneys argued that military veterans should not receive special treatment in property disputes, but the appeals court was even less sympathetic than the trial judge. They increased penalties for frivolous appeals and ordered Karen to pay additional attorney fees for wasting judicial resources. The enforcement was beautiful. Karen had to personally supervise removal of her rose garden, while I documented everything with the same survey equipment she'd tried to have confiscated. The decorative landscaping she'd spent years perfecting was dug up by court order. But here's where the story gets even better. Karen couldn't afford the $400,000 judgment, so Sarah offered a payment plan. Karen's HOA would pay me $4,800 monthly for legitimate easement use, exactly the rental rate we'd originally demanded. Karen had fought for 2 years and spent over $200,000 in legal fees to end up paying exactly what she could have negotiated from the beginning, except now she also owed penalties, back rent, and had a federal judgment on record. The monthly payments were automatically deducted from HOA fees. So every homeowner in Willow Ridge Estates now pays extra to fund my easement rental. Karen has to send me a check every month with a memo line reading Agricultural Access Rental Payment. The ripple effects were immediate and satisfying. Dale was indicted on federal corruption charges and resigned from city planning in disgrace. The subdivision's property values dropped when buyers discovered federal easement judgments in the title reports. Karen's HOA dissolved and reformed under new leadership focused on compliance rather than confrontation. My ranch operations expanded with guaranteed access. I bought additional cattle and hired 2 part-time workers. The monthly rental income funded ranch improvements, including new fencing and a equipment barn. Sarah and I, fighting property rights violations together, create strong professional relationships that sometimes become personal. The federal precedent established by our case has protected agricultural easements across Texas. Property rights organizations cite Rodriguez v. Willow Ridge Estates in similar disputes. The FBI created new protocols for investigating suburban harassment of military families, but the sweetest victory is driving my cattle truck through Karen's precious neighborhood every Tuesday and Friday as legally required for ranch operations, watching her perfect suburban paradise adapt to the reality of agricultural easements. Karen still lives in Willow Ridge Estates. But she's no longer hall president. In fact, she's barely involved in community affairs these days. She keeps her head down, pays her portion of my monthly rental, and pretends not to notice when I wave from my truck. The educational impact has spread throughout Guadalupe County. Rural property owners now know their rights and aren't afraid to enforce them against suburban encroachment. Agricultural attorneys use our case as a template for easement monetization. 3 other ranching families have successfully challenged HOA violations using our legal strategy. Annually, I host an agricultural rights workshop at the county extension office teaching farmers and ranchers about easement law, property surveys, and legal self-defense. Karen's case has become the cautionary tale about what happens when suburban entitlement meets Texas property law. But my favorite part of this story happens every month when Karen's check arrives in the mail payment for agricultural access easement as required by federal court order. It's a beautiful reminder that property rights are sacred and that sometimes the best revenge is just following the law. The legacy protection is now permanent. The federal court judgment creates a recorded easement that can never be challenged or blocked. Future property owners must acknowledge agricultural access rights. Karen's suburban paradise will forever include cattle trucks and ranch operations, because that's what the law requires from my front porch. Every evening I watch traffic navigate around legitimate ranch operations using access roads they never wanted to acknowledge. I'm reminded that some fights are worth everything you've got. Sometimes you have to survey the property to save the ranch. But you don't fight alone. You fight with federal law property rights attorneys and a community of agricultural families who've had enough of suburban colonization. You fight with historical deed records, military survey, precision, and the unwavering belief that family property belongs to the family, not to HOA tyrants with too much time and too little sense. If you're facing similar property rights violations, don't give up. Document everything with survey precision. Find attorneys who specialize in agricultural law, and remember that easements recorded before subdivision development always win. Drop a comment and tell me your HOA property nightmare story. I read everyone and respond when possible because these fights are easier when rural families support each other. Hit subscribe for more stories about communities defending agricultural heritage against suburban tyranny next week. I'm telling you about the city council that tried to rezone my neighbor's horse farm so she got her horses registered as emotional support animals. And the mayor's campaign headquarters discovered what constitutional property rights really mean. Property law finds a way. Justice finds a way. And agricultural families that fight together win together. The Double R Ranch runs cattle through Willow Ridge Estates every Tuesday and Friday and always will.